Melissa awoke in a state of deep confusion, uncertain of her surroundings and unable to recall recent events. She tried to open her eyes, but quickly shut them again as the harsh brightness stung. It was her sense of smell that first brought clarity, the unmistakable scent of a hospital. While this solved the question of where she was, it did little to quell her lingering disorientation. Next, her ears picked up on the sound of music, and she realized it was the nightly 7 p.m. news. A sense of routine comforted her. She never missed it at home, where watching it had been a shared ritual with her husband. Husband, the word struck her. Yes, she had a husband. But even as she tried to recall his name, her mind seemed to resist, like water slipping off a duck's back or a diamond that remains dry no matter how much it's drenched. After considerable effort, the name came to her. Dave. Yet as soon as she thought of it, her mind recoiled, discarding it like a burning coal. Desperate for distraction, Melissa focused on the news. The music had faded, replaced by the monotonous voice of the announcer. She forced her eyes open for a moment, enough to confirm the presence of a television mounted on the wall, then returned her attention to listening. The broadcaster read aloud a statement from a DVD they could not legally air, but could share excerpts from. To my darling wife, the statement began, I hope today's actions answer the questions you asked 3 weeks ago. Can we move past this? Can you forgive me? My answer is no to both. For clarity, I've simplified the finances. I canceled our car and medical insurance, paid off and closed all the credit cards, and created a trust for my life insurance, with my lawyer as the trustee. All our bank accounts have been added to this trust, which will distribute everything to designated charities after the dust settles. Yes, this leaves our children with no inheritance, but they've received a solid education and the best start I could provide. I've explained everything to them in letters, sparing no brutal detail, and asked for their forgiveness. I even advised them to view your future behavior as a cautionary tale on how to value those you love. It's my second to last lesson for them. The voice continued, I regret that I won't be here to see how you explain this to our children, our friends, and theirs. But by now, you realize my absence is permanent. For the record, this isn't about depression or mental illness. My actions will be recognized as those of a rational, sane mind. That doesn't mean I lacked cause to be driven to extremes. Walking in on your wife with another man is one thing. Being told to leave so they could continue is another. A provocation even the strongest man might not endure. Melissa's heart sank as she realized the broadcaster's words were directed at her. She tried to block out the sounds, but that only let her thoughts drift to the memory she had been avoiding. The incident. Dave had missed a monthly gathering with their close-knit group of friends due to work. He was supposed to be at the mine, but a mechanical issue had halted operations. The group, consisting of 9 couples at similar life stages, either without children or empty nesters, had been friends for years. That month, Susan and Carl were hosting. Dave had arrived unexpectedly, asking where Melissa was. Some guests genuinely didn't know, others fumbled excuses. Susan said Melissa wasn't present, but Graham's poor attempt at deception gave it away. His nervous glance upstairs betrayed him. Despite attempts to stop him, Dave stormed upstairs and burst into the bedroom to find Carl and Melissa together. Melissa recalled the moment with excruciating clarity. As she lay beneath Carl, she opened her eyes to see Dave standing in the doorway. Strangely, instead of reacting with shame or panic, she closed her eyes again and muttered, "Go away." She had been more focused on her attempt to achieve a simultaneous climax, a goal she had never reached with Carl. Her concentration, however, shattered. Carl remained oblivious to Dave's presence until long after he had finished. Mortified, he joined Melissa in hastily dressing and chasing after Dave, only to find him gone. The memory faded, and Melissa's attention drifted back to the news broadcast. To the media, the statement continued, I suggest you use this as an opportunity for public education. Follow my ex-wife and those involved for years to come. Show the long-term effects of betrayal. Let it serve as a cautionary tale. If the consequences are grim enough, perhaps it will discourage similar behavior. Unless, of course, the guilty party takes the easy way out. I doubt that will happen. Surely she wouldn't want to compound the children's pain by leaving them parentless. Melissa felt sick. Dave's bitter words, paired with the broadcaster's emotionless delivery, were unbearable. The broadcast concluded with a grim proposal. The media could create a program on how to end marriages ethically, offering a contrast to the actions that lead to heartbreak and destruction. The shift to no fault divorces may have seemed like a good idea at the time, but surely it's worth reconsidering. We now have evidence showing the outcomes of both the old and the new systems. An independent review could point out the most sensible path forward, whether that's reverting to the old way, keeping the new one, or finding a middle ground. Off the top of my head, I have a suggestion. Continue allowing no-fault divorces for couples with dependent children, but return to the old rules for those without. Reinstate a system where unfaithful behavior carries consequences. Under no-fault divorce, we've created a reality where, if a spouse destroys their partner's love and trust, they either face no repercussions or worse, are rewarded. That's exactly how it felt when my lawyer explained I'd end up with less than half my assets after a lifetime of loyalty and risking my health and safety to provide a comfortable life for an unfaithful wife. One request, though. Ensure this review is free from the influence of the loud, aggressive groups that seem to have undue power over our laws, pushing an agenda that steadily undermines men. Also, leave out the overly compliant types who cater to these agendas without a second thought. Finally, lawmakers. If you keep letting farmers pump animals full of hormones, be prepared for a society dealing with more and more confusion about gender. Once again, Melissa's mind tried to escape the grim tirade by revisiting the past. After the party, Dave disappeared for several days, leaving both Melissa and Carl confused and unable to locate him. She felt no guilt about her actions. In her mind, they were entirely justified. Of course, she regretted how Dave found out, but she didn't believe she was to blame for that. When Dave finally returned, she had expected a furious confrontation. Instead, what she faced shocked her. A hollow, unresponsive shell of the man she once knew. Having had 4 days of peace to prepare her argument, she launched into it, explaining that after Susan experienced health issues 3 years ago, her ability to enjoy intimacy with Carl had faded. To support Carl, Melissa had stepped in, seeing it as her duty as a friend to help. Surely Dave could understand this. Melissa elaborated, saying that her respect for her husband had remained intact. She made sure their own marital life wasn't neglected, even if it sometimes meant Dave was unknowingly receiving leftovers on days she had been with Carl. She also assured him that she had never allowed Dave to engage in certain intimate acts on those days, ensuring only she bore any discomfort, not him. To protect Dave's pride, she had kept the entire affair discreet, with only 3 other couples in their friend group aware of it, all sworn to secrecy. She was proud of this secrecy, as she believed it spared Dave the embarrassment of having his friends think his wife was unfaithful. Melissa went on to explain why she and the others had kept him in the dark. She claimed it was out of consideration for his pride, which she knew would struggle with the idea of sharing her. Her secrecy had been, in her view, a kindness. The only part she struggled to justify during Dave's absence was her reaction to being caught. In hindsight, her blunt words, "Go away," could have been misunderstood as indifference. Her explanation for this was that she had been caught in the heat of the moment and had simply reacted without thinking. She even argued that if the roles were reversed, Dave wouldn't have appreciated his moment being ruined either. Despite her lengthy justifications, Dave remained unmoved. He showed no reaction, which left Melissa feeling guilty for the first time. She asked for his forgiveness and hoped they could move on. In her mind, it was only a matter of time before things returned to normal. Over the next 3 weeks, she gave him space to process everything. They never discussed it again, and while Dave seemed nearly back to his old self, Melissa noticed something was missing. It was as though the light inside him had been extinguished. He spent most of his time in the garage, working on projects, often accompanied by the hum of his cement mixer. It never crossed her mind to ask why she never saw fresh concrete. During this time, the phone rang constantly. Couples aware of the situation worried about Dave and Melissa's marriage, while those who hadn't known anything pressed her for details. To maintain appearances, Melissa told the uninformed that Dave had always known about the arrangement with Carl and Susan, but had simply asked her to abstain that weekend for their anniversary. She apologized for breaking that promise and for the friends who had witnessed Dave's anger. Carl repeatedly asked Melissa if it was time to apologize to Dave, but she advised him to wait. With no intimacy coming from Dave, Melissa sought Susan's approval to increase her visits to Carl's bed to at least once a week. 3 weeks after the incident, she began pressuring Dave about attending the next monthly party. It was their turn to host the gathering, and Melissa saw it as an opportunity to show their friends that everything had returned to normal, ensuring the group's dynamics remained unchanged. She emphasized that it was unfair for some of their friends to still feel uneasy about events that didn't involve them. For the first time, Melissa saw Dave show any emotion. He seemed genuinely engaged. She felt relieved, believing he was finally ready to move forward. Their monthly party dates were fixed, the last Saturday of every month. This made it unusual when two couples declined, citing prior commitments. Melissa was relieved that both were from the group, unaware of the affair, sparing her from continuing to fabricate explanations. The rest of the group arrived, and the party began on a positive note. However, 30 minutes in, one of the uninformed couples left abruptly, mentioning something unexpected had come up. 20 minutes later, another couple followed suit. Growing suspicious, Melissa began closely observing the interactions among those still present. The atmosphere in the house had noticeably shifted, and it wasn't just due to the reduced number of guests. Melissa watched Dave from across the room as he spoke to Jenny and Frank, his expression intense while their faces appeared downcast. Shaking his head, Dave moved on. Curious, Melissa followed as he approached Sandra and Bob. Again, Dave's expression was serious, but this time there were no lowered gazes, only animated gestures and firm head shaking. 5 minutes later, Sandra bid Melissa goodnight, and she and Bob left. To say Melissa was furious would be an understatement. She stormed into the kitchen, determined to confront Dave for alienating their friends. Carl, noticing her anger, followed, despite her earlier instructions to stay away from Dave. "What the hell are you doing, upsetting our friends like this?" "Can't you see you're embarrassing me?" she demanded. "I'm sorry, dear," Dave replied calmly. "I'm just figuring out who the innocent ones are and who the conspirators are." "Ah, Carl, welcome. I'm glad you're both here. Out of fairness and respect for our years of friendship, I feel it's only right to tell you this. I'm going to the basement now to retrieve my pistol. When I return, I'm going to kill you both." With that, Dave left the room. Carl tried to grab his arm, but Melissa stopped him. "Come on, Carl, we need to get out of here," she urged. "Are you serious, Mel?" "He's bluffing. He's just trying to scare us for revenge," Carl argued. "You didn't see his eyes, Carl," Melissa replied. "Dave has green eyes, but what I saw weren't his eyes. They were black, like a monster's. I think we created that monster. We have to leave now." "What about Susan?" Carl asked. "Leave her. She's safe. It's us he's after." That was the last clear memory Melissa had. Her thoughts returned to the television, where the news anchor continued reading. "To the family and friends of those who claim to be my friends, but failed to warn me about my wife's actions, my deepest apologies. I hope this sends a message to society that such behavior cannot go unpunished. With the media's help, perhaps this lesson will linger for years. If nothing else, these despicable people have been removed from the gene pool." The broadcast shifted focus. Finally, to my former friend Carl, 35 days after me, you'll learn the same lesson I did, that losing someone you've loved unconditionally is worse than death. It feels like having your heart ripped out and trampled on while it's still beating. I'll see you in hell." Melissa drifted into unconsciousness, vivid memories returning to her dreams. She recalled dragging Carl out of the house, hearing the lock click behind them. On the opposite side of the street, she glanced back to see Dave staring out the window. Then, as she continued running, an enormous explosion knocked her and Carl to the ground. Just before she lost consciousness from the blast wave, she remembered instinctively, pulling Carl under a truck to shield them from falling debris. The pain from that memory jolted her awake again. On the television, the top story was being covered. An explosion destroyed a home in Mort Crater earlier today. 2 people outside the house were injured but are reported to be in stable condition. Police believe at least 8 people were inside the house and are feared dead. The residence belonged to David Brown, a shot fiber at the local mine. Further details will be provided as they emerge. Melissa slipped into unconsciousness once more, but her memories haunted her dreams. She remembered Dave explaining the explosives he used at work, a mixture of fertilizer and fuel, easy to make with thorough mixing in something like a cement mixer, and needing only a detonator and booster to set off. Her final memory before darkness enveloped her was vivid. She saw Dave standing at the window with a small yellow box in his left hand, wires dangling from it. Behind him were 7 anxious faces, their eyes darting between the box and the fleeing couple. Dave's green eyes sparkled as he smiled, raising the box and pressing a button. 2 months later, on the news. In tonight's public information segment, we plan to bring you an update on Carl Weston, the lover in the infamous Brown Weston tragedy. However, due to his tragic suicide this week, we'll instead bring you an interview with Dora Smith, daughter of Janet and Graham Smith, who died in the Mort Crater explosion. We'll also provide an update on the surge in confessions, divorces, and counseling requests sweeping the country. The ACP reports that the waitlist for marriage counseling has now extended to 3 months. Stay tuned for more. And so, the story ended